We're going to get to it. We have a lot of panelists here, a lot of comment, a lot of subjects. So I want to quickly start with Craig at the far end, give a brief 30-second introduction for those of us that don't know Next DC, and then we'll go with Andy, Bruno, and the rest. So welcome, Craig. Why don't you kick it off with a little bit of an intro?
Thanks, John. Our panel needs a slightly larger table, so good to see everyone. Craig Scroggie, CEO of Next DC. We build hyperscale, enterprise, and edge data centers in Australia and Malaysia, Thailand, and Japan.
Andy Power, CEO of Digital Realty. We support 5,000 plus customers from enterprise colocation to hyperscale data center providers in 50 metropolitan areas on 6 continents.
Hi guys, I'm good to be here. I'm Bruno Lopez. I'm the CEO of STT GDC. We are present in 11 markets around the world, mainly Asia and UK and Europe.
I'm Randy Brockman, the co-founder and CEO of EdgeConneX. We operate in 23 countries across 4 continents, largely hyperscale build-to-suit opportunities, but also we have started the business with an edge business that becomes kind of interesting in this inference days and age.
Hello everyone, this is Gio Albertazzi. I'm CEO of Vertiv. Vertiv is a global leader in digital critical infrastructure. We provide power, cooling, white space technology for the data center industry and others, but certainly data center globally is our biggest market and multiple decades of experience here.
Good afternoon, I'm Doug Adams. I'm the CEO of NTT Global Data Centers. We have 150 data centers in 20 different countries. What makes us a little bit unique and different is we're part of a $115 billion company. So we're, for the most part, self-funded. And we specialize in liquid-to-chip. We've got a couple hundred megawatts across the globe of liquid-to-chip AI installs.
Great, a lot to dive into. A lot of you are repeat panelists. In fact, I think most of you are. I want to kind of go back over the last 12 months. AI was in kind of the early innings. I think we're still in the early innings. But what do we know more about now than we did a year ago? What surprised you the most, whether it's demand, technology, capital flows? Randy, why don't you take a stab at that, and then we can get to Andy.
Wow, I get to kick it off. So I have 41 minutes to answer how much has gone on.
Go for it.
In the,
Typical.
Yeah, there you go. Look, I think it's been 24 was a pretty remarkable year. When we were sitting here at the beginning of the year, I think we thought a lot was going to happen. I think 25 is probably even going to be more interesting. I don't know if it's surprise or not surprise. I think some of the interesting things that we saw this year included massive demand, but from more than just the 3 US hyperscalers that you would typically see. Obviously, there were some Chinese hyperscalers, but there's a whole bunch of others that have risen up, whether it was social media companies, emerging NVIDIA cloud partner type folks, just a much broader base of massive megawatt demand. I'll also tell you, not surprising, for those of us who lived through the cloud expansion, the forecasting is remarkably inaccurate. How much is needed, when it's needed, where it's needed, and how much of it is impacted by the supply chain of chips. People don't know what chips they're getting, when they're getting them, exactly how much power they're going to need. And I'd say that folks let designs, maybe of our customers let the designs get a little too far, dependent on which chips. So you found the need to execute builds and designs with a lot of flexibility to really go from the CPU world up to a GPU world we don't even understand today, but into multiple hundreds of kilowatts per rack. I could go on, but I really think we should pass it around the room.
Andy.
Just to echo some of the things that Randy said, I think the buyer universe has expanded, which was a little bit surprising, and folks that were large CSPs but really stepped up into, call it the tops of the ranks in the biggest buyers, and customers that really were not significant buyers for the industry, really getting in the mix was a big piece. Not surprisingly, the enterprise flow through. You've started seeing some green shoots on that, some great customer names that have launched, call it AI, on the backs of NVIDIA. We did one with Nova Nordisk's foundation. but their definition of size is a different ball game to what the hyperscalers have been prosecuting. I think the other biggest, not surprise, is that the markets are really being redefined rapidly. And I think the dust is not going to settle on that topic from the traditional, more core markets where you saw more robust and diverse demand to the new fledgling markets popping on the map or becoming mainstream. So that's been a quick moving piece of our business.
So Craig, you see hyperscale demand in Australia, you see government enterprise, anything on those latter two categories in terms of AI use cases, cloud adoption, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think this will be true for everybody here. We've sold more in the last 12 months than we sold in the last decade. So the demand is real. It is mutually exclusive to cloud, so the underlying growth and continued use of cloud computing, both public and private, is continuing on. And we've experienced in the last 12 months, and that obviously will continue, a wave of demand on a scale that's 3 to 5 times larger than what the underlying rate of growth of cloud was, and it's just an order of magnitude bigger. So I think that's true for every organisation here, and one of the challenges obviously that creates for all of us is that use of AI and the demand for supporting liquid cooling will continue to accelerate. So for the next few years, we're all going to have to deliver more than we probably have in the last decade.
So Randy mentioned supply chain. I want to dive into that around componentry. So turn to Geo for that, and then we'll talk a little bit about energy transmission constraints and kind of the grid. But starting with supply chain, maybe talk us through your experience as an operator, first Andy, and then as an equipment provider, Geo. As you navigated through COVID, what did you see, and then where do we stand today in terms of remaining challenges?
It's almost like you just thought things were going to get easier, and then the opposite happened. I mean, we had, call it the proliferation of COVID issues, which some random component would hold up the whole train in terms of the supply chain. And then I'd say today's world, supply chains are incredibly tight, and the thought of giving up a production slot that is well into the future comes with severe consequences, because getting back in line, the line is long. So from my vantage point, the supply chain remains very tight.
Geo.
Yeah, so clearly, comments about demand and where the industry is going. The demand is there, the industry is strong. The supply chains are in an incredibly better shape than they were post-COVID. Post-COVID, there was a big, as I like to call it, kind of a supply chain and component Armageddon. We are past that big time. But I think that the critical element here is making sure that the supply chain continues to build the capacity. I never think about capacity as something kind of a binary. It's either there, it's not there. It's constant building, constant expanding. And it's not just the factory that a technology provider can have, it's the entire infrastructure, it's the entire supply chain. So we're working tremendously in that respect, and we see lead times going down, and lead times going down, ready to accommodate needs that might be unforecasted. Sometimes the industry knows where they are how much they're going to deploy in total, but exactly what is going to be deployed where is not always clear. So the ability to provide that flexibility is important. The other aspect is that geopolitics are much more complex, as we all know. So supply chain is not just about capacity; it's about the resilience that you build in your supply chain. And resilience is a lot in having multiple sources, having region for region supply chains. So I'm very optimistic. I think we are in a much better place, but it's a strong demand, it's a strong industry, so it is important to continue to gear for the type of growth.
So sticking with you, a lot of the major GPU players, ODMs, talking about liquid cooling, which was mentioned earlier. How do you think about growth opportunities in thermal management across the different categories? You got air cooling, conventional, that I think is still growing, direct to chip, immersion, other approaches. How do you kind of see that technology roadmap?
Well, we clearly, and you go back to your initial question about what did the future look a year ago and what does it look like now? I think that we now have a lot of the things that we knew were happening a year ago. We now much better where the technology is going. We know the speed at which it is changing, and certainly everything around cooling is indeed proving true, and it's accelerating further. So direct-to-chip liquid cooling is a fact. So the combination of liquid and air is a fact, and it's here to stay. Going back to what Randy was saying, the only thing that may be kind of the biggest challenge is not if liquid cooling is going to be there and how big it's going to be, but is everyone here builds assets for 15, 20 years, and we know that flexibility is, and future-proofness is key to whatever we do. So we see cases of over-provisioning cooling capacity with air and power, exactly because you know that it will be direct-to-chip, you know that it will be liquid-cooled. You do not know how many liquid-cooled racks relative, and what the relative loads you will have in a data center during the 15, 20 years of the asset. So that flexibility is fundamental. So it is, I think, an opportunity for the entire industry.
Bruno and Craig, what are you seeing in terms of customer demand around, how specific are they around things like rack density, liquid cooling?
I think we are seeing across a lot of the footprints that we are in, that demand really coming true. I think I think Craig said it, that we've seen more take-ups in the last 12 months than we've seen in a lot of our careers the past few years. So I think that opportunity is real. I think we're seeing challenges still to do that, because power is still a problem even in these countries, and governments are getting involved in terms of regulating the availability of power to data centers, and that's a challenge. That's a challenge that we have to face up to. The opportunity is how do we work collaboratively with grids as well as with governments to understand the crucial opportunity that's before us, with data centers being the bedrock, the foundation of having that whole, if you want to digitalize your country, and all these countries that we have talked about a national digitization plan. But you can't do that if you realize that you don't have enough data centers in the first instance, and you put moratoriums and other stuff in place. So I think that's the big challenge.
I would add, from a density point of view, liquid cooling is not new, but certainly the scale of it is, and what we're seeing today. So you've got an order of magnitude shift in rack density, and what would have ordinarily, and it's very specific depending on the customer type, but if you had considered a cloud deployment needed 10, 15, 20 kilowatt racks today, 30 to 130, and in the future more than 400 in one generation, is not going to be uncommon. I think Gio said this before, but air will not go away, but liquid will become a much, much larger feature of design over time. And depending on the customer and the application, depending on the location and the type of infrastructure, not everybody will go to liquid cooling. And certainly Jevon's paradox will be true as we build and deploy more technology and more users adopt that, cost will continue to fall, and therefore adoption will continue to rise.
So one company comes to mind, it's NVIDIA, that's kind of dominating the headlines, but there are other chip makers. There's custom silicon from the hyperscalers themselves. And Gio, I guess I wanted to kind of get your perspective on how does the maybe increasing diversity of GPUs and their specific requirements factor into your product roadmap?
Well, clearly there is diversity, and we see a path to loads up to 1 megawatt per rack. It may not look like the rack that we know today, of course, but that's the type of loads, the type of densities. So if you think about where we start with a kind of a 1 or 2 order of magnitude smaller loads per rack, well, then we have a spectrum of technical solutions. So it's not that if there are other let's say, silicon providers that operate at various parts of the spectrum from, let's say, 10 kilowatts to a megawatt per rack, there will always be kind of the entire range of solutions available. So from a technology roadmap standpoint, I feel pretty confident that the industry, well, it's me, make a big noise here, that the industry is able, and certainly Vertiv is able to address and provide technology for the entire spectrum. So, and again, my recommendation to the industry is design flexibility in your infrastructure, and that's why the conversation, kind of data center developers, hyperscalers, colos, silicon providers, and technology providers at the same table constantly is so important because we're shaping the future here.
So Doug, you kind of scratched the surface with some stats about how much directed chip you've actually implemented. Are you seeing that across a wide variety of customers? Is it just the early adopters? Any geographic color around that as well?
Good question. So generally speaking, we're seeing most of that action in the US. It's across a couple specific customers. We happen to have within our customer portfolio some of the very early adopters of this technology. And so chip manufacturers, large AI providers happen to be within our customer base. And so we started on this journey about 2 years ago. And it was not an easy journey. We all have done, for the past 25 years, air-cooled technology. I think everybody in the data center industry has mastered that. I think we've got it down. Liquid to the chip and liquid immersion are different technologies. And I would say they're not completely proved out yet because we spent the last 2 years swapping out different CDU units, creating new test environments. It's very rigid to the point that Geo made. You don't set and forget like you do in an air environment and then just deploy servers. You're bringing glycol to racks through rigid tubing with pumps and filters, and you have to think through how you put that infrastructure in place. And what we have today in our installs are up to 200 kW per rack, and to your point, we're moving to a megawatt. And so how is that going to happen? How do you get that flexibility? What does that look like over time? It's a very interesting technology, and the devil is completely in the details. We have gone through and changed how we sealed the pipes because we found Teflon wasn't effective, so we used other materials. The learnings that we've got over the last 2 years have been incredible. Thank goodness we had the right set of customers, and that's how we got those learnings.
Energy, path to power, a big constraint towards meeting the demand. Bruno, you kind of touched on it. Maybe to stick with you, what are you seeing in terms of the variety of approaches that regulators and utilities are taking across Asia?
I think it's quite varied. I mean, you've seen a very moratorium-like approach with Singapore, which had lifted its moratorium partially for 80 megawatts, but talked about doing more of that, but it's still very slow. I think you see in some of the Asian countries where commitment for power is supposed to be, if you look at Malaysia, for example, if you believe everything that been put out as applications, there's more power that's needed for data centers than it is being used by Singapore today, for example. Is that really practical? Can you actually deliver to those? So the grid's not caught up in all these countries. So it needs to, us as data center players need to work very collaboratively with these governments, with the power companies, look at alternative sources, alternative solutions, on-site generation, hydrogen fuel cells, whatever. All the innovative solutions, I think we need to think about, we need to bring to the table, because otherwise there will be a problem delivering to these requirements. So the regulators are taking an active approach, because the other challenge is the whole sovereignty issues. I think a lot of governments have wised up to the fact that data is actually gold, and you want to keep all that data about their citizens in their own country. So the whole issue about the geopolitical impact is going to come to the fore. dovetailing in with the national ambitions of countries to have their AI strategy take front and center and driving all that innovation that AI would bring to their industries and their economy. So there's all of that, and then there's the geopolitical availability of chips. It's a big question mark.
So we're going to get to that a little later, but maybe stick with the power topic, anti-power. So what do you what do you see across other regions?
I mean, what was remarkable to me going back to surprise, obviously, yes, the moratorium in Singapore was called a canary in the coal mine on this topic. I think the big bombshell was in Northern Virginia being called no incremental power for 40 years at the time. But how rapidly the dominoes just kept going down region by region, which in hindsight looks more intuitive because where demand was spilling over, those markets were never of the size and scale to support the infrastructure to begin with. So they got quickly exhausted one by one, especially in the United States.
Yeah, I'd jump on that topic. I'd say, Bruno, you asked Bruno about Asia. I'd say that's our easiest market. Yeah, far and away. And I'm not saying it's easy, but you want to see power complexity. Look at Western Europe. Look at the United States right now. And Asia's, it's tough. It's interesting. Malaysia's going to look like, Johor's going to look like Ashburn here pretty soon. And they're going to have the same, I think they're going to realize they've said yes too many times.
Yes, right.
And we're going to hit there. But I think in picking up on what Andy said, you're seeing it just rolling through market after market after market. And by the way, in some markets it's generation. In many, it's transmission. In some, it's lack of investment in the distribution. So it's all aspects. And then there's some regulatory matters that kind of make it more complex. So I think you're going to see us have to bring your own power. I mean, I think Texas is talking about making bring your own power a requirement for every data center. We'll see where that plays out or not. Early stages. In Europe, many of us sitting at this table have had to bring our own power. We as the data center operators have had to change what we do. In some markets, we've had to become a grid operator and build the infrastructure and do it. So I think power is obviously a problem, but and to Andy's point, it rippled through very fast. And that's not so bad. I think the good news is, and now it's incumbent on this industry to help fix it. So I think that's going to give us some flexibility on how we do it. And probably, I think the previous panelists talked about bring your own power is going to become there. Maybe bring your own water, or better yet, don't use it. There are closed loop systems that work real well. So it's going to be kind of interesting. But Bruno talked about Asia. Asia's about to have the same thing happen. Yeah. As these things deploy, it's about to run out again. So interesting.
So I think what AI has done is probably extended the life and relevance of natural gas. But I want to hit on maybe nuclear and other sources. Craig, do you have any kind of perspectives from an energy generation standpoint as to where we need to be?
If you think that obviously we're going from general purpose computing to accelerated computing, and that's going to cause an enormous shift in the sheer volume of power, our generating capacity was not designed to cater for those needs. And the transmission infrastructure is also not being invested in. And this is a global problem. It's not really a localized problem. And Randy's point is fair, but I think there's just as many challenges in Asia as there are in other theatres. The key change for us from an industry point of view is that not only do we have a power availability issue, but we have a sustainability issue. And in order for us to get to where we need to go, customers will need 3 different types of electrons. They will need clean electrons, they'll need baseload or reliable electrons, and they'll need cheap electrons. And the hallmark of every developed society has been having low-cost energy. And some of the challenges that we're seeing emerge on a global scale is that energy prices, as a result of bringing renewables into the energy mix to bring down our carbon emissions, has caused the intermittent nature of electricity to drive prices up, not down. Battery technology is required on a scale that would be able to support the firming capacity, because for all of us, our industry operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But the sun isn't always shining and the wind's not always blowing. So I think it's fair to say that there is an absolute requirement for net zero alternative technologies. And if you live in a country like New Zealand and you're blessed with hydro, that's great. But in order to be able to power what was a 10 megawatt data centre and then has become 100, which will soon become 1,000 or a gigawatt, we will need to deploy large-scale nuclear or SMR behind the meter. It's not really a question of if that will happen, it's just a question of when.
And where. Geo, we talked about Vertiv's role in thermal management, but as we think about multiple power sources, how does that affect companies such as yourself?
Well, multiple power sources, of course, require a lot of more management, let's say, of the powertrain, as we like to call it. So the entire behind the meter, let's say, powertrain is going to have a much more active role that it has had so far, because there is problems of kind of shifting and arbitrating the various sources, as Craig was explaining. There is kind of a interaction with active interaction with the grid. So not only is the power infrastructure going to be kind of larger with kind of a higher and bigger, let's say, components across the board, but really being the big power manager of the entire data center, incorporating battery storage systems in one continuum system that is definitely, as a whole, vital for the success and kind of the data center as a whole working properly. Combine this with some difficult and more difficult and denser loads that are common lately. So we see big opportunities of expanding and making the role of the powertrain more central to everything we do.
So Craig talked about nuclear, whether it's SMR or whether it's reactivating old plants like 3 Mile Island, the Susquehanna project in Pennsylvania. Any of you want to kind of comment on nuclear is kind of the path forward over the next 10 years, and how relevant will it truly be, or are we going to have NIMBYism that essentially makes it a bit of a false hope?
From my perspective, I think that nuclear is one of many potential options. I think 3 or 4 years ago, when people first started talking about SMRs, frankly, I laughed. I didn't think that we were ever going to get there. AI has changed everything. The amount of power offtake that we have and the low availability everywhere in the world. To Randy's point he made earlier, in Europe, good luck finding power just about anywhere. Asia is right now easy. The US, the whole world changed when Dominion started cutting power off for people. And so it is a changed world. And we're actively looking at every alternative out there. We have groups of people in this $115 billion company looking for how we're going to handle power moving forward. It is, I think, the #1 thing facing our industry. And I do believe SMRs are real. I do believe that once they get to scale, that they'll be very, very usable. The other thing is, in this AI race, why are all the countries across the world trying to gain dominance with an AI? It's because the first one there wins, because once the AI becomes aware and is able to be truly advanced, we're in barely even the first inning of AI. We barely scratched the surface. AI is the answer to power. It's the answer to how we're going to handle high-density data centers, because once you actually are able to use AI to address those issues, the answers will become very clear. That's why there's such a massive race to be the first one to have true AI at the ability it can be, versus where we are today in the infancy.
Bruno, you mentioned anything more nuclear?
I think just want to add to that. I think the concept of land banking, there's a lot of power banking going on. A lot of data center players and others, right? And I think governments and the grids will close that loop very quickly. In a lot of our countries that we're in, they're going to force you to put your money where your mouth is. If you want to put a commitment on power, you got to pay upfront, and you got to pay, and that is going to force some stabilization because people will have to realize that it's not free.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Yeah,
It
is.
I
agree.
That is a really good thing.
Yeah.
There are a whole bunch of false positives in that market, right?
Yeah.
I used to build shopping malls, and I own a lot of land. I'm going to be a data center developer. I heard it once, I heard it 1,000 times. Hey, me and my brother, oh my gosh. But I think that's actually key, because I think we are going to have to be part of improving and funding the upgrade to these systems. And look, it's nice to be able to sit up here with you guys, and we will benefit. Those of us that know when that power is needed, what's required to get there, can design, build, and deliver these complex solutions, and they are getting to be very complex solutions, to Doug's point. It's okay that we put some of that money at work up front to do that and take the noise out. By the way, that'll get a more accurate demand. That'll make it much clearer what infrastructure needs to be upgraded and how much. Not just because I own land, I'm allowed to submit an application, right? So I think that's a good thing. I hope that happens.
So there's kind of two countervailing forces here that I want to get in. One is kind of data sovereignty, data localization, so which would argue for more diverse deployments, and then we have export controls, which is maybe going to have the opposite impact. But let's start with data sovereignty, and how does that affect the markets that you're seeing demand in, Andy, and which ones you would choose to kind of focus your development on?
I mean, the data sovereignty topic has been here for a while with the cloud, right? And that was a net benefit to our industry to be able to support these customers across numerous countries. And I think it makes a lot of sense, right? And cloud has continued to grow. And we had a record third quarter, and 50% of our signings was to AI, and the rest is cloud, private enterprise, hybrid IT. I think the stakes are just getting ratcheted up here, and you saw that in some of the recent proclamations on where the chips can go in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 countries. And also, what are we talking about? What is the product or the service of the data center? One, cloud computing for secrecy, and obviously government's different than corporate enterprise on a localized basis. But we're talking about the AI arms race here that Doug touched on here, right? Which then brings it much more, quote, back to home. Now, what is a little contrarian to that is, from my vantage point, the quantum of AI has been super US focused so far, relative to percent spilling outside the other. Not that it hasn't happened, but the lion's share has happened. Now, it's intuitive back to the sense that if you want to build data centers at scale rapidly in markets that are some of the largest markets in the world already, have the infrastructure sitting there, you kind of go to the United States first. But just like we're in the first at-bat of the AI game, I think the sovereignty angle is going to be another big piece of this.
I would only add to Andy's comments that we are living in one of the most challenging geopolitical environments we have seen for a few decades. So there's no question that I think Bill had that slide in his opening remarks in relation to geography, and look at the regions where you can deploy chips today. The regulatory environment, the political issues associated with that, but the national security implications are the ones that ultimately are playing out. They're playing out right now in real time, and there is no question that AI is an arms race, and the arms race is probably one of the greatest economic battlegrounds that we've had to experience in many decades. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I can tell you again, we're a pure play data center. GDCs, we make data centers, we operate data centers, we build data centers. But again, we're part of a 300,000 person, $100 billion corporation. And many of the conversations that are occurring at the top levels with our clients are around sovereign clouds. I think that is probably the top conversation we're having right now, is every country, every company is looking for their own AI clouds because of this arms race we're in right now. And so that's where the dominance in those conversations are happening.
So NVIDIA has played a role. They've announced a number of local partnerships going back more than a year, particularly in Asia. And so Bruno, I guess I wanted to ask you how you've seen demand playing out across that geography.
Yeah, we've got quite a bit of success with NVIDIA across Asia. I think they've taken an approach where they work with various countries and developing a sovereign AI strategy. They've done that recently I was with them in Thailand when they announced their Siam AI cloud strategy, and Indonesia, they've done that together with Ooredoo and Indosat, and they're doing that in India as well, etc. And we've seen that that's one strategy they've done to extend their influence. The other one is through this concept of NVIDIA Compute Partners, NCPs, and that too has proliferated a lot in Asia. Now, I think all that will take a view as a result of some of these export controls and Diffusion Act that comes to play. We'll see how that pans out, but the inherent demand that we are seeing coming through NVIDIA across all these footprints has been quite strong.
Maybe sticking with you, Vertus based in the UK, but it's looking at continental Europe. So as you look at Europe and kind of contrast it, I mean, we talked about the grid issues and so forth, but on these topics of national AI arms race and so forth, how do you see that playing out differently?
I think we've taken a slightly different strategy with Vertus, where we've been very focused on specific markets. We've announced and expanding in Berlin, as opposed to London, where we've been historically very strong. And we have identified a couple of other key cities that we are actively announcing some stuff soon, where I think the challenges remain around both the availability of power, the regulatory issues in each geographies remain a challenge, and Randy talked a lot about that, the complexity of that. I think there's a lot of uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity around some of these things, and the companies that win, which a lot of them on this table, win because they are able to deal with that kind of complexity in that situations and work through these challenges.
So all of you operate across multiple regions or have a Five Eyes country as your primary kind of base of operations. Andy mentioned overwhelmingly this has been a US-centric phenomenon with all the news from last week, and who knows what might happen under the new administration around export controls and where AI investment can and can't happen. How do you see just the regional shifts playing out? Will it be more US-centric? How do we see that across?
I don't think any of us know exactly how it's going to play. But I think there's a few things. I think Andy's right, spot on. We agree with where we've seen it. But that shouldn't shock us. You can build a large language model anywhere, right? And there's only a half a dozen companies that can build the big, massive models that are going to be required. And then Doug's right. Then it's going to become taking the model you choose and tweaking it with your enterprise data. Very private, very good. Do I think some of the export controls that were offered up at the tail end of an administration looked a little bit like a half-baked idea thrown out quickly? Yeah, sure. I mean, if you look at it and do the math, there's not enough there to build sovereign clouds, right? So why would you restrict some of it to that level and all of a sudden almost open up that the only way you could build a sovereign cloud is if you use the Chinese tech? I mean, they kind of got it half right and half wrong. So, but I think we also need to be careful of the moment in time we're in and look longer term. Today you see a lot of training, a lot of discussion around training. If we fast forward 3, 4, 5 years, I think it'll be 80% inference and or embedded AI and or tuned models for the enterprise-specific situation that's going to dominate the compute. It's not there yet, so we don't see it deploying around the world. and then that'll shift. As opposed to today, you see the big buildups happening in the U.S., but then you can export those models. So, Andy said it great. We're not even in the first inning, first at bat, and maybe a warm-up pitch right now.
Maybe.
We're at that, maybe a warm-up pitch. So, look, the regulation as written. There are going to be tiers, that's probably right. Was it thought through and some of the limits and some of the chip? Oh my gosh, the repercussions if that were executed would be real. You would actually end up the opposite of what you intended to do there.
Yeah. And just anecdotally, I can tell you that the 250 megawatts we have of deployed liquid to the chip is all in the US. We have some signed in Europe, just very small scale. We have liquid immersion in India, and we've got some signed contracts for liquid to chip, not deployed yet. And we're making our facilities in Asia ready. I think we have maybe 1 or 2 signed, very small, not at scale. It's the US is where all that dominance is happening today. In the future, I think power is going to be the regulating issue. I think power is the big denominator that is going to probably cause AI to skip most of Europe and head directly to India and Asia. And I don't know if you guys are seeing that, but that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah. I think we've seen a lot of traction in India as well, India and some Southeast Asian countries, but a lot of it with US, customers, and not so much the Chinese as some of the other competitors in the region do. So I think there's going to be all this playing out soon in terms of how that demand flows through. But in terms of use cases, actually, it's not that much in Asia today. The lead is still in the US. And flowing that through is what's going to happen in the next, years.
So power does exist sometimes in remote areas. So I guess the projects that one hears about in Timbuktu, let's say, where there's power but not necessarily data lakes or whatnot, are those interesting for you, Andy?
So what's remarkable is the pace of change and the amount of known unknowns. If you look at, I'm just looking around the panel, we're all associated with companies, I believe, that these companies were in the data center business before cloud computing, before the largest cloud computing company was even invented, and went through the move from corporate enterprise to network centricity to cloud zonal to now AI. And the things that we're navigating, which feels like only good times for data centers, are just pretty unbelievable. We're navigating where geopolitically the things are going to go, with not only where the data sits, but where the chips arrive. We're navigating where the locational or latency sensitivity around this business moves to, Randy's comments on inferencing. And we're doing this in a hard asset base that does not depreciate over. I mean, these things got to live for more than 15 years, right? So, the reason I give you that long vignette was, here, at least at Digital, we're very focused on making these investments long-term, robust, diverse demand and growth. And these up-and-coming markets, I'm not betting against them necessarily, but until they're proven out that more boxes are checked on the longevity of the demand and diversity of demand in those markets, that would somewhat keeps us at pause.
Everybody agrees with that? Disagrees? Thumbs up.
I would only add that if you leave the location out for a moment and consider that we're only 5 years from 2030. If you read Ray Kurzweil's new book, The Singularity is Nearer, it seems like it was only a little while ago we were talking about Y2K and the journey we've been on. I think it's almost certain that the rate of change continues to accelerate, and we'll see more change in the next 5 years than we've seen in the last decade. And the last decade has been extraordinary.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add to Andy's point, and I think it was a point I think we all agree with, is there is a little bit of a last man standing play happening right now. So in markets I never dreamed you would see large takedowns or any takedowns. We're starting to see it because they have power. And that's really again, it comes back to power. That's really the only play that we're seeing. We choose not to play in those markets. We choose to go into the tier 1 and tier 2 markets and stay out of those markets. But that is, I think, where you are seeing a little bit of acceleration because there's so little power available.
Gio, any last words? You get the final say here.
Wow. So I think going back, the rate of change and acceleration that we'll see in the next 5 to 10 years will be mind-boggling. I think the industry is very active. I think I've never seen an industry, and I've been in this industry for many years, both from a technology standpoint, but also kind of the entire ecosystem, is able to react at a speed that probably we would not have imagined 5 years ago. So this bodes well in terms of our ability as an industry collectively to react to the many things, geopolitics, technology, demand that will be thrown at us. So very, very optimistic, and it's certainly probably the most exciting time so far, and looking forward to even more exciting times ahead.
Well done. You get invited back for next year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan, for doing a
Yeah.
great job.
Thank you.
Very good.
Well done.